They say motherhood is unconditional, that you love your child no matter what, even when they forget you, even when the phone doesn't ring, even when a whole day passes, Mother's Day, and you sit alone at the kitchen table, listening to the quiet like it might apologize if you wait long enough. I didn't need flowers. I didn't need brunch. I just needed a call. 1 minute. One voice. One reminder that I still mattered. But the silence came. Heavy. Familiar. And this time, it stayed. Life happens. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't about a missed call. It was about what that call represented. Or didn't. So I sat there, in a house I once built around her laughter, holding a warm cup of tea that had long since gone cold. And in that silence, I made a decision. This is the story of how I stopped waiting to be chosen, and chose myself instead. If you've ever loved someone who forgot you the moment they didn't need you, stay with me. This story is for you. And if it resonates, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. We tell quiet stories here. The ones that don't make headlines, but should. It started with a calendar, not even a loud one. Just a little square on the kitchen wall that I'd been flipping through for years. Appointments in blue ink, birthdays in pink. And in red, I'd circled one day. Just one. Mother's Day. I circled it like a child would, hopeful, like marking it would make it matter more. That if I put it in ink, she'd remember. I had the kettle on by 8 a.m., the good cups out. Not the mismatched mugs from the back of the cabinet, but the porcelain ones. The ones she used to pretend to sip from when she was little. Tea party with Mommy, she'd say, feet swinging under the table, pinky raised like she was royalty. I kept looking at the phone. It wasn't like I was waiting for diamonds. I didn't need her to cross state lines or show up on my doorstep with a bouquet big enough to need both hands. Just a call. Her voice. A simple, "Happy Mother's Day, Mom." Even that awkward, half-distracted tone she sometimes had when she called from the car would have been enough. By noon, the tea was cold, and I'd refilled the kettle 3 times. Each boil slower than the last. The house was quiet, except for the sound of my own thoughts circling like vultures. I checked the phone again. Not even a text. Nothing. No, sorry, today's crazy. I'll call later. No, thinking of you, with a smiling emoji. Just nothing. The funny thing about silence is that it doesn't hit you like a slap. It seeps in, drips down the walls of your day, turns the furniture into strangers. Makes your own reflection in the mirror look like someone waiting on a doorbell that's never going to ring. I tried to distract myself. Dusted the window ledges, scrubbed a floor that was already clean. Turned on the TV just to drown out the sound of my own heartbeat. I even called my sister. Not because I wanted to talk, but because I wanted to see if I could. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was bright, like the sun. "Hey, May, happy Mother's Day." I nearly cried. She passed the phone to one of her kids, then another. "Hi, Auntie May." "We love you." One of them told me he was saving up to buy me a new mug because he accidentally broke the one I'd given him last Christmas. Another asked if I remembered that time I let them eat ice cream for dinner. I remembered. I remembered everything. Every little thank you. Every "I love you." Every quiet act of care that wasn't owed to me, but given anyway. They weren't mine by blood. Not the way she was. Not the way my daughter had been once. But they saw me. When I hung up, the silence came back, heavier. And this time, I didn't push it away. I let it wrap around me. Not to hurt me, but to show me something I hadn't been willing to see. She hadn't forgotten. She had chosen not to remember. There's a difference. People love to make excuses for grown children. They're busy. They're tired. They've got their own lives now. But you know what? I had a life too. I had a job. a husband who passed too soon, a mortgage. I raised her through late shifts, broken washing machines, and flu seasons that never seemed to end. And not once did I forget to make her feel like she was loved. Now, all I wanted was 5 minutes. And she couldn't even give me that. The clock hit 5 p.m. Still nothing. I sat at the table with the red-circled calendar in front of me, and finally let myself feel it. The ache. Not the kind that comes from being alone, but the kind that comes from realizing you've been alone longer than you were willing to admit. That was the moment something changed. Not in anger, not in bitterness, in resolve. Because I realized that legacy isn't just about money or names carved in stone. It's about remembrance. And if the one I gave everything to couldn't remember me on the one day that was supposed to mean something, then maybe she didn't need what I had to give. But someone else did. And I already knew exactly who. It rained that night. The rain kept tapping the windows like it wanted in. Or maybe like it was trying to pull something out of me. I made tea again. Not because I wanted it, but because the ritual was familiar. Safe. Heat the water. Steep the leaves. Watch the steam rise. At least the tea remembered me. At least it showed up. By the time I sat down, the silence had grown roots in the walls. I could hear them, almost, those old thoughts, creaking like floorboards. Maybe I was too hard on her. Maybe she did forget. Maybe tomorrow. But that voice, the one I'd trained myself to listen to through years of sacrifice and second-guessing, was quieter now. Weaker. Because I had another voice growing louder inside me. A sharper one. A voice that asked, "Why is it always you who has to understand?" I remembered when she was 12 and came home from school crying because a boy said her teeth were crooked. I sat with her in the bathroom for an hour, brushing her hair while she asked if she'd ever be pretty. When she was 16 and wrecked my car because she was texting while driving, I didn't yell. I didn't ground her. I sat with her in the driveway and said, "What matters is you're safe. We'll figure the rest out." I remembered every late-night pharmacy run, every birthday cake I stayed up to bake from scratch, even when my hands ached, every parent-teacher meeting, every fight I let her win, just so she would know someone in the world would bend for her. And now, nothing. Not even a text. I looked around the room. Everything she'd ever drawn still hung on the fridge. Faded scribbles from preschool, a water-stained Mother's Day card from second grade, the crooked magnet that held her acceptance letter to college. She used to say, "You're the strongest woman I know." She said it with pride, like it was a badge we both wore. But somewhere along the line, I became someone she only remembered when she needed something. Tuition, rent help, a reference. And I gave it, every time. Because that's what mothers do, right? We give. But there's a difference between giving and being emptied. And I was done being emptied. I stood and walked to the hallway, the one lined with photo frames. Her first Halloween, her dance recital, the trip to the mountains where she swore she'd never get tired of being my daughter. There was a picture of me holding her on my hip, both of us laughing at something behind the camera. I looked young, so young, and tired, but happy. Because back then, I still believed love returned itself. But I was wrong. Sometimes love just leaves. I opened the closet at the end of the hall, where I kept the safe. I hadn't looked inside in years, not since her father passed. But I knew what was in there. Papers, insurance documents, the original draft of the will, his signature, my name, her name. It was all set in stone. But stone can be broken, or rewritten. My hands didn't shake as I took the documents out. There was no hesitation, no guilt, only clarity. It was a strange kind of power, the kind that comes not from rage, but from release. She had taught me something. not with words, with absence. She had chosen silence, and silence doesn't get the last word. The next morning, I didn't feel grief. I expected it. Expected to wake up with a knot in my chest, some flicker of guilt for what I'd decided the night before. But instead, I felt light. Hollow in a way that wasn't sad, but clean. Like something had finally been scraped out that never belonged to me. The house was quiet, as always. But it didn't feel like it was watching me this time. It felt like it was with me. Like it understood. And maybe it did. The floorboards had listened to every argument. The walls had held every apology I never received. The silence had cradled my disappointment so long, it must have learned my name by now. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the woman left behind. I spent the morning cleaning, not out of nervousness, not to busy myself, but to make room. Physically, mentally. I boxed up old bills, tossed out magazines that hadn't been touched since 2020, and dusted off the top of the armoire in the guest room. That was the room her father and I had always said we'd turn into something special when we retired. A reading nook. A place for visiting grandkids. He died before we figured it out. And she never asked what happened to it. At the bottom of the old cedar chest, beneath blankets that hadn't smelled like lavender in years, I found the photo album my sister had given me 5 Christmases ago. I'd forgotten about it. Or maybe I'd avoided it. The front was hand-stitched. Family, forever. Embroidered in that soft gold thread she used to sew onto all her gifts. I sat down on the bed and flipped through the pages, one by one. And there they were. Not my daughter. My sister's kids. Jackson, covered in glitter after the kindergarten play. Emmy, with frosting all over her nose from the cake I let her eat before dinner. Nate, the quiet one, clinging to my waist the day he lost his first tooth and thought he'd swallowed it by mistake. He cried into my sweater and called me his second mom. I still remember the warmth of his tiny fists wrapped around my fingers. They had never asked for anything, never expected gifts or money or more than I could give. They sent birthday cards, real ones, with handwriting that slanted awkwardly and smudged in places. They called me on Christmas, on Thanksgiving, on random Thursdays just because they saw a commercial that reminded them of the cookies I used to bake. And on Mother's Day, they called. All 3 of them. Every year. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be remembered without prompting. I closed the album slowly, pressing the cover flat like it was a heartbeat. Then I walked into the den, pulled the chair up to the desk, and opened the laptop. It took me a minute to find the folder with the scanned copy of the will. The official one. The one where everything, the house, the savings, the life insurance, was assigned to her. Her name stared back at me in bold type. Cold. Clinical. Like it had ever meant safety. I highlighted it. Deleted it. Just like that. The space it left behind was blank. Waiting. I typed in new names, 3 of them. Each one steady. Each one a person who had shown up for me without needing a reason. I saved the file. Then I printed it. Then I called my lawyer. His voice was sleepy, but polite. "Everything okay, May?" "No," I said. "But it will be." I didn't explain. I didn't need to. I just scheduled the appointment. By the time I hung up, something in me felt aligned. Not healed exactly, but no longer bleeding. I looked around the room. Same furniture, same curtains, same picture frames on the mantel. But everything looked different now. Not because the house had changed, but because I had. She had erased me, year by year, text by text, missed call by missed call, and I'd finally learned how to do the same. The day of the appointment, I dressed carefully. Not for show, not to impress, but because something inside me needed the weight of that decision to reflect in the way I walked through the world. Black slacks, a cream blouse, my late husband's watch, still ticking quietly on my wrist after all these years. I wore my hair up, not a strand out of place. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a grieving mother. I saw a woman standing on the edge of something irreversible. The drive to the lawyer's office was short. Pinewood wasn't the kind of town where anything took long. But every red light felt longer than usual. Like the universe was asking if I really wanted to do this, giving me just enough space to turn around. I didn't. The office smelled like old books and faint lemon polish. Mr. Cranston greeted me with that smile of his, the one he always wore like armor, professional, pleasant, distant. He offered me coffee. I declined. My hands were already warm, and I didn't want them shaking. "I looked over your email," he said, smoothing his tie. "You're requesting a change in your beneficiary structure. You're sure?" I nodded once. Not dramatically, not emotionally. Just certainty, plain and solid. "I'm sure." He studied me for a moment, then pulled out a folder. "We'll need to re-sign the trust documents. I can walk you through it." He started explaining assets, disbursement conditions, age thresholds, tax shelters, but I wasn't really listening. My eyes were on the signature line, where her name used to be, where I had written it down with love years ago, because back then, I truly believed legacy was something you gave to the ones who shared your blood. But I knew better now. Legacy doesn't belong to blood. It belongs to the people who show up. It belongs to the hands that hold yours when the world is mean and unrecognizable. It belongs to the ones who remember your birthday without needing a calendar reminder. It belongs to the ones who see you not for what you gave them, but for who you are. And she hadn't seen me in years. I signed the papers, one stroke at a time. My handwriting was slower now than it used to be, a little shakier around the curves, but there was power in that pen. With every letter, I felt something click back into place, like I was reclaiming pieces of myself I hadn't realized I'd let her take. When it was done, Mr. Cranston looked up. "Would you like us to notify the prior beneficiaries?" I looked at him. Let the question settle between us like dust. "No," I said. "Let her notice the silence, just like I did." He didn't press, just nodded and slid the papers into a sleek folder with my name embossed across the front. "It's done," he said. Those two words echoed. It's done. Not finished. Not forgotten. Not forgiven. Just done. I walked out of the office into the bright afternoon, the sun higher than it had any right to be on a day like this. The breeze was warm, unseasonably warm for spring, and for a second, I stood there on the sidewalk, letting it pass through me. Like maybe the world was trying to make space for the new shape I had taken. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't sad, but because this wasn't the kind of pain that asked for tears. It was the kind that demanded stillness, the kind that required you to carry it, quietly and deliberately, until it became something else entirely. I drove straight to my sister's place. I didn't call ahead. I didn't want time to second-guess myself. I just parked in the driveway, walked up the porch steps, and knocked. She answered in her gardening gloves, dirt on her cheek, a watering can in one hand. She blinked at me, surprised. "May?" I held up the folder. "I need to talk to you. About your kids." She looked at the folder, then at me. Her mouth parted slightly, unsure. I didn't smile. I didn't soften. "I changed the will," I said. "They're in it now." Her hands dropped the watering can. The thud on the porch floor was the only sound between us. She didn't say thank you. Not right away. She didn't ask why. She just stepped back and opened the door wider. And I stepped through. The air inside my sister's house smelled like rosemary and lemon wood polish. It was the kind of smell that clung to memories, that made you think of Sunday dinners and open windows, and children's voices echoing down hallways. It was warm, lived in. Not perfect. There were smudges on the light switches, a pair of muddy sneakers by the door, but it felt like people belonged here. She led me into the kitchen without saying a word, her gloves tossed on the counter, her hands still speckled with dirt. I sat at the same table we'd shared 100 times before. Birthday cakes, tea after funerals, quiet chats when the world outside was too loud. But today, the silence between us was deeper. Not heavy, just waiting. She poured coffee into 2 mismatched mugs. No sugar, no cream, she remembered. I took a sip, letting the warmth fill the space where words hadn't yet reached. Finally, she sat across from me, elbows on the table, face bare and open. "You want to tell me why?" I didn't answer right away. I looked around the kitchen. The children's artwork taped to the fridge, a cracked bowl filled with apples, the dent in the wall where Emmy had crashed her bike inside the house last summer. The life here wasn't polished. It was real. "She didn't call," I said. My sister blinked, confused at first. Then understanding flickered across her face like the flash of headlights in the dark. "On Mother's Day?" I nodded. "She forgot?" I let out a slow breath. Numbers she remembered. I know she did. She just didn't care enough to act like it. My sister looked down into her coffee like it held something more than bitter steam. "I'm sorry, May. But that wasn't what I'd come for. I wasn't here for apologies. Not from her." "She made a choice," I said. "So I made mine." I pulled the folder from my bag and slid it across the table. It made a soft shh sound on the wood, like a secret being told. She didn't touch it right away, just stared. "They're in it," I said. "Jackson, Emmy, Nate, everything that would have gone to her. It's theirs now." Her mouth opened, then closed. Her fingers hovered over the edge of the folder like she wasn't sure if she had the right to hold it. "May, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just tell them when they're older. Or don't. I don't care about thanks. I just want it to go to someone who remembers who I am." She looked up at me, and for the first time in a long time, her eyes were glassy. She had always been the strong one, the loud one. But right now, she looked small, humbled. "They adore you," she said quietly. "You've always been more than an aunt. You've been their safe place." I nodded. "And that's what I want this to protect. Their safe place. Their future." She finally opened the folder, flipping through the pages with slow, careful hands. I watched her as she read. Her lips moved silently over the lines. The numbers. The names. Her breath caught when she saw the final clause, the one that sealed it. No room for contest. I'd had the lawyer make it ironclad. "They'll never forget this," she whispered. "I don't need them to remember the money," I said. "I need them to remember the choice." We sat there a long while after that, not talking, just being. Eventually, I stood. She didn't try to stop me. She just followed me to the door, and as I stepped out onto the porch, she touched my hand, just briefly. Not a grip, not a pull, just connection. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "I know," I replied. "That's why it matters." I walked back to my car with the weight of the folder gone from my bag, but heavier in meaning than ever before. When I pulled out of the driveway, I looked in the rearview mirror. She was still standing there, watching me, like someone who finally understood what it meant to be chosen. The driveway disappeared behind me as I turned the corner, but I could still feel her eyes on me. Not judgmental, not questioning. Just there. Like she finally saw me, not as the big sister who always had it together, Not as the quiet one who made sacrifices in silence, but as someone who had quietly made a choice powerful enough to split the past in two. I pulled into the cemetery without thinking. It wasn't planned. I didn't even remember turning the wheel. 1 minute I was driving. The next, I was rolling slowly past headstones, gravel crunching beneath my tires like an old, familiar voice. I hadn't been back since last fall. Not because I didn't care, but because I hadn't known what to say. I parked near the far corner. The grass was a little overgrown, yellow dandelions scattered like confetti over the graves. His was simple, just stone and dates. No quote, no flowery scripture, just James Holloway, beloved husband, 1952 to 2009. 14 years since I stood right here in heels that sank into the mud and listened to a preacher talk about heaven like it was something that would make up for everything we never got to finish. I stood there now, the same way I had then, hands folded, mouth closed, grief tucked neatly beneath my ribs. I did it, I said aloud. My voice sounded strange in the open air. Too loud, even though no one was around to hear it. I stood there a moment longer, then dropped to a crouch and started plucking weeds away from the base of the stone. They came up easy, roots soft from last night's rain. It felt like a ritual, like something I needed to do to steady myself. I gave it to them, I said. Not her. The words hung there, suspended in the stillness. I waited, James. I waited for her to remember me, for a call, for a scrap of the kind of love we gave her by the handful. But she didn't. She didn't even try. My hands clenched around the stalks of a wild daisy growing too close to the marker. I yanked it out, tossed it to the side. You told me once that love isn't measured in grand gestures. It's measured in who shows up when nobody's watching. And she didn't show up. My throat tightened. I don't think she even sees me anymore. Not really. I'm just the woman who pays her bills when she's short and listens to her excuses when she forgets my birthday. I'm not her mother. I'm a safety net. And maybe that's my fault. Maybe I wove it too well. The wind picked up, a slow, sighing sweep across the trees. The leaves whispered like they knew something I didn't. She used to be sweet, I said. You remember? She used to draw us cards and bring home flowers from the neighbor's yard. She used to cry when she thought she'd disappointed me. I swallowed the ache trying to rise in my chest. But she doesn't cry anymore. She doesn't remember anymore. Not the real me. I stood slowly, brushing my hands on my pants. She forgot who I am, but they didn't. I thought of Emmy's laugh, the way Jackson always hugged me too hard, like he didn't know his own strength. Nate, who once left a note in my purse that said, "Don't be sad. You make the best soup ever." They remembered. They saw me, so I gave it to them. The clouds were moving fast now, patches of blue stretching wide between them. I could hear birds somewhere above. The world didn't stop. Not for grief. Not for clarity. Not even for justice. I reached out and touched the top of the stone, just once. Thank you, I whispered. For the memory. For the strength. For the kind of love that taught me to stop waiting. Then I turned and walked away. The air shifted when I left the cemetery. Not dramatically, not like some cinematic gust of closure, just subtly. The wind was softer, the sky brighter, or maybe I was just finally seeing it without the film of sorrow I'd worn like a second skin for too long. I drove home with the windows down, let the breeze comb through the silence that clung to me. The radio stayed off. I didn't want words. I didn't want noise. I just wanted the hum of tires on asphalt and the steady rhythm of my own breathing to carry me the rest of the way. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same as it always had. White shutters slightly crooked, porch swing leaning from years of wear, that faint creak of wood calling out like it had something to say. But something had changed. Not the house. Me. I stepped inside, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a ghost walking through someone else's story. This was my house, my kitchen, my hallway of photos, my bedroom with the chipped dresser and the quilt I'd sewn during chemo, stitch by shaky stitch. I walked slowly through the living room, running my fingers across the edge of the sideboard. The pictures were all still there. Her graduation, our family trip to Cape May, that blurry one of her sitting on her father's shoulders with her arms spread wide like she could fly. I stared at it longer than I meant to. She must have been 6, maybe 7. We'd spent the whole day chasing waves and eating too much saltwater taffy. I remembered how her hair had smelled like sunscreen and sea air. How she'd leaned into me that night and whispered, "I hope we're always like this." We weren't. The distance didn't come all at once. It came in quiet ways. Missed birthdays, shorter phone calls, words like busy and overwhelmed, flung around like apologies that were supposed to be enough. And I let them be. For years, I let them be. Because mothers forgive. That's what we're told. That's what we're taught. I picked up the photo frame and held it in both hands. Her smile was wide, fearless, full of something I hadn't seen in her in a long time. I tried to remember the last time she looked at me like that. I couldn't. I set the picture down and walked into the den. There, on the corner of the desk, was my phone. The same phone that hadn't rung. The one I'd stared at on Mother's Day until my eyes blurred. Still no missed calls. Still no messages. The emptiness didn't sting anymore. Not in the sharp, desperate way it once had. It ached now. Slow and dull. Like pressing on a bruise that started to heal. I sat down and unlocked the screen. Scrolled past old messages. The last one from her was 3 weeks ago. "Can you send some money for rent? I'll pay you back soon. I promise." I had sent it, of course. Without reply. Without question. I read it again. Not to feel pain, but to remember the truth. That's who I was to her now. A wallet. A fallback plan. And maybe she didn't mean it that way. Maybe she didn't even realize she'd stopped seeing me as a person. Maybe that was the saddest part of all. I turned off the phone and placed it face down. Then I reached for the letter. I hadn't planned to write it, but the words came like they had been waiting all along. I wrote slowly, carefully. No accusations. No screaming on the page. Just truth. Not the kind meant to hurt. The kind meant to end. I told her the inheritance was gone, that I had given it away, that it had gone to people who showed up, not just when they needed something, but when I needed them. I told her I loved her. Still, that love never leaves, but it doesn't have to stay where it isn't returned. I told her not to call, not because I hated her, but because I needed peace more than I needed answers. When I finished, I sealed the envelope and left it on the table. I didn't know if I would send it, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel powerless. I felt free. I didn't send the letter that night. I left it on the table, the same way you leave a glass of water on the nightstand when you're not sure if thirst will wake you. It just sat there, plain, sealed, quiet. But I could feel it in the room, like it had its own weight, like it had its own pulse. The ache in my chest wasn't sharp anymore. It was familiar, like an old scar. It didn't throb, it just existed. And maybe that was worse, because pain can be soothed. But numbness, that stays. By morning, the light came in gray. The kind of light that tells you nothing has changed, but you're still expected to carry on. I made coffee and stared at the letter again. It was still there. still sealed, still mine. Part of me wanted to rip it open, to soften the edges, rewrite the words, maybe add a paragraph of apology, or something about hope, something she could cling to. But I didn't, because this wasn't about punishment or guilt. This was about truth. And the truth doesn't need to be rewritten just because it's hard to swallow. I slipped the envelope into my purse and left the house. No makeup, no earrings, just me and that quiet piece of paper. The post office was 4 blocks away. I walked instead of driving. I needed the air. I needed the movement. My feet on the pavement felt like a heartbeat. One step, then another, then another. No looking back. It wasn't until I reached the last intersection before the post office that I saw her. Lisa Devereaux, my neighbor, my friend, once upon a time. She was across the street, pushing a stroller with her grandson in it. She caught my eye and waved. I hadn't seen her in months. We used to talk every Saturday, coffee on her porch, trading stories about our kids, laughing like women who knew the truth of motherhood, how beautiful and brutal it could be. But then, over time, we'd stopped talking. Not out of anger, just life. Distance that widened in silence. Pain neither of us had words for. But now, she crossed the street. Fast. Like something in my face called her over. "May," she said, a little breathless. "It's been a while." I nodded, unsure what to say. She tilted her head. "Are you okay?" I could have lied. I could have smiled and said I was fine, but I didn't have it in me. "My daughter didn't call me on Mother's Day," I said. Just like that. Lisa blinked, then placed a hand gently on my forearm. Neither did mine. The words landed with a thud, not a blow, but a shared ache, a quiet understanding. "She sent me a message the next day," Lisa said, voice shaking. "Said she was sorry and hoped I wasn't mad. But it was just words, you know?" I nodded. I did know. Words that came too late. That tasted like obligation, not love. We stood there in silence for a moment, the world moving around us. Horns in the distance, a plane overhead, a breeze tugging at the hem of her coat. Then she looked down at my purse. "You mailing something?" I hesitated. "A goodbye." She nodded, like she understood exactly what that meant. "Some of us gave everything," she said, and ended up with silence. I reached into my purse, pulled out the envelope. It felt heavier now, more real. I stared at it a moment longer, then stepped forward, crossed the street, and dropped it into the mailbox. It didn't make a sound, just vanished into the dark. Gone. Lisa stepped beside me. We didn't speak, just stood shoulder to shoulder as the wind picked up. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. The mailbox clicked shut behind me, and just like that, it was no longer mine to hold. I stood there a moment longer, as if the weight of the letter hadn't quite left my hands. But it had. I could feel it. Like setting down a bag you'd carried too far. Your body still aches even after it's gone. Not because of the weight itself, but because of how long you pretended it didn't hurt. Beside me, Lisa didn't say a word. She just stood there, her arms folded gently across her chest, her eyes on the horizon like she, too, had mailed something invisible. Maybe she had. Maybe every mother carries a letter she never writes. A goodbye that doesn't wear the name. We didn't need to talk. The silence was its own kind of conversation, one only women like us could understand. Eventually, she gave me a soft smile, touched my elbow, and walked away. Back to her grandson, who was now twisting around in the stroller to watch a squirrel dart through the grass. Back to her life. One full of small joys and quieter griefs, just like mine. I walked home slower than before. The streets looked the same. Cracks in the pavement where they'd always been. The Roberts' overgrown lawn. The Miller kid's bike tossed half in the driveway, like always. But everything felt more honest. Like I wasn't pretending anymore. Like the world had finally taken the mask off with me. When I stepped through the front door, the house met me with stillness. Not cold, not distant, just calm. The kind of calm that comes after the storm has passed and everything's soaked and quiet, like the earth itself is catching its breath. I left the door open for a moment longer than usual. Let the breeze touch the hallway. Let the air clear out whatever part of me had been waiting for her to call. She wouldn't. Not now. Maybe not ever. And oddly, I wasn't sure I wanted her to. Not because I didn't still love her, I did, and I probably always would, but because I had nothing left to explain. The letter said it all. Not with venom, not with blame, just with truth. The kind of truth that echoes when it's read in silence. The kind you can't argue with, only sit with. I moved through the house slowly, watered the plants, opened the curtains in the living room, folded the laundry that had been waiting 2 days longer than it should have. The small things. The kinds of things that keep you anchored when your heart feels like it's been rearranged. It wasn't until I got to the hallway that I stopped. The photos again. All those faces staring back at me. Her face. I reached for the one of her on her wedding day. She looked beautiful, poised, but distant in a way I hadn't noticed before. I remembered that day. Remembered how she barely looked me in the eye, too busy with friends and timelines and vows I wasn't sure she understood. She thanked me like I was a vendor, called me mom, the way someone might say thanks to the caterer after the cake's been cut. I took the photo off the wall, not to throw it away, but to let it rest. I replaced it with a photo of Nate and Emmy and Jackson from last Christmas. They were all in pajamas, huddled around the tree, eyes bright, cheeks pink. Emmy was holding the scarf I knitted her, still half wrapped, and Nate had drawn me a card with crooked trees and stars that spelled, "We love you, Aunt May." It didn't match the rest of the photos. The frame was newer, but it belonged. That wall wasn't a shrine to the past anymore. It was a record of who had stayed. I stood back, arms crossed, staring at the arrangement. The light hit it differently now. Warmer. Truer. And then, from the corner of the room, I heard a soft knock. Not the front door. My phone. I walked over and picked it up. A name on the screen. Claire. My daughter. For a moment I didn't move. Didn't answer. Just stared. Then, slowly, I turned the phone over, screen down on the table. Let it ring. She could call if she wanted, but I didn't owe her an answer. Not anymore. The phone stopped ringing. No voicemail. No follow-up text. Just silence. And for the first time since all of this began, I didn't feel gutted by it. I didn't sit there replaying the sound of her name lighting up my screen like a lifeline. I didn't hope. I didn't ache. I just stood there, the phone face down on the table, the quiet humming through the house like it belonged. Because it did. I walked away, into the kitchen, where the light had shifted. Afternoon sun poured through the windows, casting long strips of warmth across the floor. I stepped into one of them, just stood there barefoot, the tile cool beneath me, the sun soft on my shoulders. There was peace in that moment. A small one, a quiet one, but real. I made tea, not because I needed comfort, but because I wanted it. There's a difference. I didn't hover near the phone. I didn't check the window like she might suddenly appear. I sat at the table and drank slowly. And it was only then, only in that stillness, that I felt the grief uncoil. Not grief for the inheritance, or the letter, or the years I'd given without thanks. Grief for the girl I had raised. The girl who used to braid my hair while we sat watching cooking shows. The girl who wrote me notes and slipped them under my pillow. You are the best mom ever, even when you're mad. The girl who used to reach for my hand without thinking, who called me mama even after the other kids had grown into mom and mother. That version of her lived somewhere inside me still. And she was the one I was mourning now. Not the woman who forgot, but the child I remembered. And mourning her didn't mean I had to keep suffering. It meant I could let go. Later that evening, just before sunset, I got a knock at the door. For one wild moment, my heart skipped. But when I opened it, it was Jackson. He stood there with his backpack slung over one shoulder and a pizza box in his hands. Mom said you might not have eaten, he said, shrugging like he wasn't saving me from something. I was headed this way anyway. I stepped aside and let him in without a word. We sat on the couch, the pizza between us on the coffee table. He didn't say much. Neither did I. We just ate. In silence. And that silence wasn't hollow. It was full. Of understanding. Of presence. He asked if I wanted to watch something. I said no. We sat anyway. When he left, he hugged me tight. One of those full-body hugs that tells you exactly how someone feels without them needing to say a word. You doing okay? He asked, voice low. I am now, I said, and I meant it. After he left, I walked through the house slowly, turning off lights, closing curtains. When I passed the phone again, I saw it had lit up once more. Another missed call. Claire. This time she left a voicemail. I didn't listen. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because I knew what she would say. Something about how she meant to call. How things had been crazy. How she hoped I was okay. How she missed me. Words. Just words. But love, real love, doesn't wait until it's convenient. And I wasn't living in convenience anymore. I was living in truth. The next morning, I stood in the kitchen with the voicemail still sitting unread on my phone, like a bruise I hadn't pressed yet. It blinked at me from the screen. One missed message. 22 seconds. That's all she had to give me. 22 seconds. I didn't listen to it. Instead, I set the phone face down on the counter and turned back to the kettle, steam rising like a quiet reminder that I was still here. Still breathing. Still standing in the same kitchen where I used to cut her sandwiches into heart shapes and tuck notes into her lunchbox. Have a great day, sweetheart. I love you always. She used to save those notes. Said they made her feel brave. I stared out the window while the water boiled. The garden out back was overgrown. Wild, in a way that would have once embarrassed me. But now, I let it grow. The dandelions didn't ask for permission. They just reached for the sun anyway. I envied them for that. I poured the tea and sat by the window, letting the warmth fill the silence she'd left behind. I could almost hear her voice from years ago, running down the hallway, arms flailing, socks slipping on the hardwood. Mom, watch me. Look at me. I always looked, every time, no matter what I was doing, because that's what mothers do. We see them, even when they don't see us. And now, she was the one who had stopped looking. There's something devastating about being invisible to the one you raised. Not ignored, not hated, just forgotten. Folded into the background of their lives like furniture that serves a purpose, but doesn't get noticed until it breaks. I was tired of being furniture. That afternoon, I opened the letter from the bank, the final confirmation, the revised trust, the names I had written in ink, now made permanent in their files. Jackson, Emmy, Nate. The paper smelled like something final, cold, clean, but it felt right in my hands. like something I'd always meant to do, but hadn't allowed myself the courage until now. I slid the letter into a folder and placed it in the desk drawer next to the others. Life insurance, the house deed, the prepaid funeral arrangements. Everything in order. Everything sealed. Everything chosen. My name was still on every line. That was what mattered. I spent the rest of the day cleaning. Not because the house needed it, but because I did. I opened windows, stripped beds, swept corners that hadn't seen light in weeks. It was more than dust I was clearing. It was everything she left behind in her absence. All the parts of me that kept waiting. Hoping. Hope is a beautiful thing until it starts to rot. I scrubbed it out of the floorboards. When I found the old box of photo negatives in the hall closet, I almost put them back without looking. But something told me to go through them. Slowly. One by one, I held them to the light, each frame flickering with pieces of a life I had almost forgotten was mine. Her first steps. Our dog, Daisy, who used to steal her stuffed animals and hide them under the porch. The three of us at the county fair, her on her father's shoulders again, smiling like the world had never touched her. I put the negatives back and sat down on the edge of the bed, hands in my lap. And that's when the second call came. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't hear it, but because I did. Every ring a test I no longer needed to pass. Every vibration a question I didn't owe an answer to. The phone went silent again, then buzzed. Voicemail received. I picked it up, looked at the screen. Her name. Still saved under the same contact it had always been. Claire, my girl. I stared at it for a long time. Then I edited the name. Just Claire. It hurt more than I expected. Like cutting a thread I'd been clinging to in the dark. But I had to do it. Not out of anger, but survival. There's a point where holding on stops being loyalty and starts being self-harm. And I wasn't bleeding for someone who wouldn't even show up to wrap the bandage. That night, I lit a candle. Just one. Placed it on the kitchen table where the letter had once been. It flickered against the dark. Small, steady, honest. And in its light, I finally saw myself clearly. Not the mother she remembered when it was convenient. Not the woman she only called when the rent was late. Just me. Still here. Still whole. Still choosing myself. The candle burned low by morning. The wax curled around the base in folds like melted fabric. The flame just a small, flickering breath trying to hold on a little longer. I watched it from across the kitchen, tea cooling in my hands, the silence around me thick, but not unbearable. That candle had done something the phone never could. It stayed. I hadn't listened to the new voicemail either. It sat on my screen like an unopened wound, but the urge to press it was gone now. The desperation that used to claw at my throat every time her name appeared had finally receded. Like a fever breaking. Like air returning to a room that had been sealed too long. She could speak if she wanted to. I had nothing left to say. Instead, I turned to my list. I had started it a few days earlier, on a scrap of paper ripped from the back of an old envelope. It wasn't a bucket list, not the way people imagine them. No skydiving, no exotic beaches. Just a list of things I'd always said I'd do, later. After retirement. After the house was paid off. After she moved out. After grief stopped showing up in every corner of the room. Later had finally arrived. I stared at the paper, rereading the first few items. Paint the guest room. Bake sourdough from scratch. Drive to the coast, alone. Plant daffodils. I circled that last one. Then I stood up and pulled open the drawer beneath the sink. The gardening gloves were still there. Faded, one thumb split at the seam. I slipped them on anyway, grabbed the old trowel from the back porch, and walked outside. The soil was soft from last week's rain, earth that yielded without a fight. I knelt in the flower bed beneath the window and dug, quietly, deliberately. My knees pressed into the damp ground. I didn't mind. The dirt felt like something sacred today, something forgiving. I planted every bulb with care, lined them in rows, spaced them evenly. The instructions said they'd bloom in early spring. It was late fall now, but I liked the idea of planting something that would outlive the winter, something that would rise again after everything else had gone cold. I stayed out there for over an hour, fingers aching, back sore, the sun crawling up my spine in slow warmth. I didn't think about her once, not until I stood up and saw the swing. It hung slightly crooked now, one rope lower than the other. The wood faded, the corners worn smooth by time and hands that no longer gripped it. She used to love that swing. She'd beg me to push her higher, then higher, until her feet kissed the sky and her laugh cracked through the air like a bell. I walked over and sat down, the swing groaning beneath me like it remembered everything I had forgotten. I didn't cry. I just closed my eyes and let the breeze move me. Forward, back, forward again. She was still in me. That would never change. But she didn't own me anymore. The hurt she left behind, the silence, the missed calls, the half-hearted apologies, it all stopped here. This was the last place her ghost would sit. I opened my eyes and looked out over the yard. The patch of soil freshly turned, the bulbs sleeping beneath. I thought of the spring to come, of the yellow blooms pushing their way through frost, reaching for the light with no memory of the cold that buried them. Maybe healing was like that too, a quiet stretch toward something new. Inside, the house smelled like lemons and old wood. I cleaned the kitchen, humming without realizing it. A song my mother used to sing while folding laundry. I couldn't remember the words, but the melody held. Later that afternoon, Emmy called. She wanted to know if I'd come to her school's winter showcase. She was singing in the choir, third row, third from the left. "I know it's just a bunch of old Christmas songs," she said, "but it would mean a lot if you were there." "I wouldn't miss it," I said. And I meant it. Not out of obligation. Not because I was trying to fill a hole someone else had left, but because I wanted to be where I was wanted. I wanted to give my time to the people who never made me beg for it. She squealed on the other end. "I'll save you a seat." After the call, I sat down at my desk and crossed something off the list. Be someone's yes. Then I picked up the pen and added something new. Let what's gone, stay gone. And just beneath it, in smaller letters, let what's growing, grow. The day of the winter showcase arrived wrapped in cold. The sky was low and gray, the kind of gray that hangs heavy, like it's carrying stories it's not ready to tell. I stepped outside wrapped in a coat too thick for comfort and walked to the car with a purpose I hadn't felt in months, maybe years. The steering wheel was cold under my fingers, the engine protesting before it gave in. As I pulled out of the driveway, I glanced back at the house. The porch light flickered on from the timer. The daffodil bulbs still slept beneath the dirt, waiting for a season I might not live to see. But I had planted them anyway. Because not everything we plant is meant for us. The school parking lot was already full when I arrived. Parents with arms full of coats and gift bags hurried through the front doors, their breath puffing in clouds. I walked slower. Not because I was uncertain, but because I had nothing to prove anymore. Inside, the auditorium was warm, packed with folding chairs and the buzz of community. Children in white shirts and red ribbons filed past, rehearsing lines under their breath, tugging nervously at sleeves, giggling in bursts they couldn't contain. Emmy spotted me from across the room and lit up like someone had switched her on from inside. She waved so hard her entire body moved with it, and I waved back with a grin I didn't know I had in me. "I told you I'd be here," I mouthed. She nodded and ducked behind the curtain, disappearing with the others. I found a seat near the front, second row, just left of center. Close enough to see her face, close enough to be seen. I sat with my purse on my lap, hands folded, letting the warmth of the room settle into my bones. Around me, the low murmur of conversation washed over everything. Fathers in work boots, mothers with tired eyes, grandparents with cameras already out. I used to do this for Claire. I used to sit just like this, teetering on the edge of my seat like my love alone could help her remember her words. I used to believe that showing up was enough to matter. But now I knew better. Now I knew it only matters if they notice, if they care that you're there. The lights dimmed, the crowd hushed, and the music started. A simple piano note, a slow breath. Then their voices, clear and a little wobbly, filled the air. Emmy was third from the left, just like she said. Her ribbon was lopsided, her ponytail loose, but she stood tall. And when she sang, her eyes scanned the room until they landed on me. And then she smiled. Not just a smile of recognition, but of connection. The kind that says, "I see you, and it matters that you came." I felt it then, like a spark under the ribs. Not regret, not grief, but the sharp, beautiful ache of being valued. Every word she sang reached me. Not because the notes were perfect, they weren't, but because the intention was. Because in that moment, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't furniture. I wasn't a second thought. I was chosen. The performance ended with polite applause and shaky bows. Parents surged forward with cameras and coats and voices too loud in the small space. I waited at the edge of it all, letting the chaos move past me. Emmy ran up with flushed cheeks and sparkling eyes. "Did you hear me mess up the second verse?" she asked breathlessly. I laughed. Number. But even if I had, it wouldn't have mattered. You were wonderful. She hugged me tight, arms wrapped around my waist. I felt the sincerity in it, the full weight of a small body that trusted me without condition. "I'm glad you came," she whispered. "I'm glad you asked me," I said. Afterward, I drove home slowly, the dark settling deeper now, the cold biting sharper. But inside me, something was warm, steady. Back at the house, the porch light still glowed, the windows still fogged with heat. I stepped inside and stood in the quiet. No blinking notifications, no unanswered voicemails calling from the kitchen counter. I walked to the fireplace, lit only by the flicker of a single candle I'd started burning each night. It had become a ritual. One small flame, steady against the dark. I sat beside it, hands folded, and whispered into the stillness. I was someone's yes today. And that was enough. The house was still when I woke the next morning. Not the kind of stillness that makes you feel alone, but the kind that cradles you. A stillness that says, "You're safe here." Light slipped through the blinds in narrow bands, slicing across the bedroom floor like soft ribbons. Outside, the frost hadn't yet melted. It coated the windows like lace, delicate but unyielding. Winter didn't want to leave yet. And that was fine. I didn't need warmth to feel whole. I made coffee instead of tea that morning. Something about the bitterness grounded me. I sat at the kitchen table in my robe, staring at the candle stub still sitting in its little glass jar. It had burned nearly to the bottom. The wick was buried in melted wax, leaning like it had finally exhaled. I understood that kind of surrender. The phone hadn't rung again. No texts, no follow-ups, just silence. But it didn't sting anymore. I didn't check it like I used to, waiting, hoping, bargaining with time. I'd stopped playing those games. Some silences are just people telling you who they are. And once they've told you enough times, you stop asking them to change the ending. I opened my notebook and added a new line to the list. Speak to the version of yourself who stayed. Because she deserved something too. Not just closure. Not just clean floors and folded laundry and reheated coffee. But honor. Gratitude. She had been through the quiet disappointments. The birthdays remembered only by spam emails and advertisements. The holidays where a single phone call would have changed everything, but the phone never rang. The nights spent staring at old photos, wondering where she'd gone wrong. But she didn't break. She still opened the curtains every morning, still cooked meals, even if they were only for one, still planted daffodils in cold dirt because she believed in spring, even if she might not live to see it bloom. She still loved. That version of me. She still chose tenderness, even when it wasn't returned. So I wrote her a letter. I started it like I was speaking to a stranger, because in many ways, she was. Dear you, the one who stayed. You didn't get the thank you. You didn't get the apology. You didn't get the redemption arc you deserved. But you got through it anyway. You kept loving in silence, kept showing up in the spaces where no one clapped, no one watched, no one cared. You gave when it wasn't easy, when it cost you, when it broke you, and you never asked for more than a little kindness in return. So this is me saying what they never did. I see you. I am you. And I'm proud of what you survived. I signed it and tucked it inside the back of my journal. It wasn't meant to be mailed. It was meant to be remembered. That afternoon, I went for a walk. The cold bit through my sleeves, but I welcomed it. It reminded me I was still alive, still capable of feeling. The streets were quiet, just the sound of wind through bare trees and the distant bark of a dog behind a fence. I walked past the old bookstore downtown, the one that still put handwritten notes in the window next to the staff pics. One caught my eye. A woman becomes unstoppable when she realizes she doesn't need to be remembered to matter. I stood there, reading it over and over. The glass was fogged with breath, not mine, but it felt like it could have been. Because that was the truth, wasn't it? I had spent so many years trying to be unforgettable, trying to be the mother she would never let go of. And when she did forget me, when she let go anyway, I mistook that as failure. But now I knew better. Being remembered was never the goal. Being whole was. I walked home with that sentence still echoing through me, like a thread winding its way around the bruised parts of my heart. By the time I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, I felt taller. Not physically, but rooted. That night, I lit a new candle, a fresh one. And this time, I didn't light it for grief. I lit it for growth, for peace, for the woman who didn't need to be chosen to know she was worthy. The flame caught quickly, like it had been waiting. The flame flickered long after the room had gone quiet. I sat across from it, legs tucked beneath me on the couch, wrapped in the same shawl I used to wear on Sunday mornings when Claire was little. She used to run her fingers along the fringe, whispering that it looked like the mane of a lion. She was always inventing stories, casting herself as the brave one, the hero. I used to believe she'd grow into the kind of woman who wouldn't forget where she came from. But life has a cruel way of shifting the ones we love into strangers we wouldn't recognize if we met them fresh on the street. The candle hissed once, then steadied. I sipped lukewarm tea from a chipped mug and stared at the quiet. That kind of silence that's not empty, but earned. I didn't miss the noise. I didn't miss the apologies. I missed the possibility. The possibility that she might still be somewhere in there. The girl with messy braids and scraped knees who once called me her favorite person in the world. But no amount of remembering could bring her back. And no amount of waiting would force her hand. Letting go wasn't a decision I made in one grand sweep. It happened in pieces. in ordinary moments, like watching the mail come and not hoping, like hearing the phone buzz and not flinching, like lighting a candle for myself, for once, and letting the room glow only for me. That's the kind of power no one ever talks about. Not loud, not public. Just the quiet kind. The kind you find when you stop asking for crumbs and start feeding yourself whole. The next morning, I found an envelope in the mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Just my name, written in a handwriting I hadn't seen in years, but knew instantly. That looped M, like a dancer mid-twirl. That crooked Y, that always dipped too low. Claire. I held it in both hands, the way you hold something fragile. I didn't open it right away. I stood there in the driveway, coat flapping in the wind, mailbox still open behind me like a mouth mid-confession. The cold bit at my fingertips, but I didn't care. I brought the letter inside, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at it like it might open itself. The candle from last night had burned out completely. A tiny puddle of wax hardened at the bottom of the jar. I touched it without thinking. It was cool now. Done. I opened the envelope slowly, careful not to tear anything, though part of me wanted to rip it in half, unread. But I owed myself the closure. Not her. Me. It wasn't long. 2 pages, front and back, blue ink, unsteady in places. Words crossed out and rewritten. No, dear Mom. No, I'm sorry. Just Claire. Raw and unfiltered. She said she didn't know how to fix what had gone silent between us. She said she hadn't called because she didn't know what she'd say, and not saying anything started to feel easier than facing what she'd done. That she hated how the silence grew until it became a wall too thick to knock down. She said she got the letter. The one I mailed weeks ago. Said she read it 3 times, then cried until she couldn't breathe. I know you think I stopped loving you, she wrote. But I didn't. I just forgot how to show up. And then I forgot how to come back. I stopped there, my breath snagging in my throat. Because that was the truth I'd been waiting for. Not a dramatic apology. Not a declaration of regret. Just honesty. She hadn't meant to erase me. She just never learned how to come home without shame. I kept reading. She didn't ask for the inheritance, didn't ask for forgiveness. She said she didn't expect anything from me. Not anymore. I just needed you to know I see it now. All of it. You were never just a fallback. You were everything. And I'm sorry it took losing you to understand what I lost. That line broke something open in me. Not the part that still hurt, but the part that had been frozen. I folded the letter carefully and placed it beside the candle's remains. I didn't cry, not like I thought I would. The tears came softer this time. Not grief, not rage, just the ache of being seen a little too late. And still, being seen. It didn't fix anything. It didn't undo the missed birthdays or the cold Mother's Days, or the way her voice had become a stranger on the line. But it mattered. I stood, poured fresh tea, and brought the letter into the den. Sat beside the photo wall, the one where her picture used to hang, now replaced with Emmy's wide grin and Jackson's crooked tie. I stared at the empty space on the end. And then, without hesitation, I went to the hall closet. Pulled out the old shoebox of photos. Flipped past holidays and vacations and quiet moments long buried in dust. I found one of her, about 16, sitting on the porch steps, eyes too tired for her age, holding a book in one hand and petting Daisy with the other. She looked lost. But she was still mine then. I brought it back to the wall and placed it gently in the space I'd cleared. Not to replace anything, not to reclaim her, but to remember that there had been love. Once. And sometimes, that's enough. I lit a new candle. poured the wax from the old one into a small dish. Let them sit side by side on the mantel. One gone, one still burning, like grief and grace, sharing space in the same room. The new candle burned slower than the last. I sat beside it with the letter folded neatly in my lap, the wax from the old one hardened like a scar next to the fresh flicker of flame. They didn't speak to each other, but somehow, they understood. The past doesn't leave just because the present arrives. It settles beside it, quieter, wiser. If the old flame had taught me anything, it was how to burn and still remain. I hadn't written her back. Not yet. I'd read the letter 3 more times since yesterday, each time feeling something different. The first time, grief. The second, bitterness. The third, a strange, quiet hope that had no business being there. I didn't know if that hope belonged to me anymore. What she'd written, her confession, her guilt, her attempt at acknowledgement, it didn't erase anything. But it cracked something open. A door I thought I'd nailed shut. And all day, I kept asking myself the same question. What do you do when someone you loved finally turns around, but you're already walking the other way? The house was warm. The floorboards creaked with familiar sounds. The kettle whistled from the kitchen as the wind whispered against the window panes. It was a day like any other. And yet, everything inside me felt like it was shifting, stretching, making room for something I wasn't sure I trusted. That afternoon, I stood in the garden again. The soil had hardened from the frost, but beneath it, I knew those daffodil bulbs were still there, waiting, resting, gathering strength for something beautiful. I crouched and brushed my fingers through the dirt, just to feel it. To remind myself that growth was happening, even if I couldn't see it yet. My breath hung in the air. I could see it now, each exhale visible, proof I was alive, proof I had stayed. Inside, the phone buzzed. I froze. Not out of fear, but recognition. The sound didn't feel like a threat anymore. It just felt like a choice. I walked back in and glanced at the screen. Claire again. Not a call this time. A message. Just 3 words. Can we talk? I stared at it for a long time. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I did. And it terrified me. Talking meant facing everything. The years of silence, the small betrayals, the unbearable weight of love that went unreciprocated. Talking meant opening a wound I'd only just begun to let scar over. But not talking meant staying here, in this purgatory of almosts and what ifs. And I was tired of limbo. I sat at the table, picked up the phone. My fingers hovered over the keys, then typed, slowly, deliberately. Not yet, but maybe. Then I hit send, and exhaled. I thought it would feel like defeat. It didn't. It felt like boundaries. Like I could hold both truths at once, that I still loved her, and that I didn't owe her anything but honesty. Later, I pulled out my notebook. The list sat where I'd left it, the edges curling slightly, the ink faded in places. I added a new line. Leave room for redemption, but don't chase it. It was never about punishing her. I wasn't trying to teach a lesson. I wasn't playing a game of who could hurt more. I was just done asking to be seen. If she saw me now, it was because she had chosen to look. And that had to be enough. That evening, Emmy called again. She wanted to bake cookies. Said her mom had a migraine and her dad was useless in the kitchen. Could she come over? I laughed, told her I'd pick her up in 15 minutes. When she got in the car, she was already rambling about school and how Nate spilled an entire can of soda in her backpack and how she swore Jackson was secretly in love with someone but wouldn't say who. Her words filled the space like music. We got home, tied aprons around our waists, and dusted the counters with flour. She cracked eggs with too much enthusiasm. I let her. We burned the first batch, undercooked the second, and finally got it right on the third try. She offered me the first cookie, still warm, chocolate melting at the center. "You're the best," she said with her mouth full. And I smiled. Not just because she meant it, but because she said it without needing anything in return. That night, after she left, I sat at the window with a fresh candle lit beside me. The house smelled like vanilla and cinnamon, like childhood and comfort. And I let myself feel it. Not the loss, not the longing, the peace. Claire might call again. She might write. She might even come home, standing on the porch with a bouquet of apology and tears in her throat. Or she might not. But either way, I had already come home to myself. And I was done leaving. The nights had grown longer. That deep winter kind of darkness, where the sun sets before dinner and the sky turns black like it's trying to hide something. I used to hate this time of year. The silence, the shadows, the way the cold crept into my bones and made me feel brittle. But now, the darkness felt different. Not like an ending, more like a pause, a breath the world was holding before something new arrived. I'd started to lean into it, the quiet. I left the lights off longer, let the dusk settle in, let the corners of the house fill with soft shadows and low lamplight. There was something sacred about it, something that made the small things louder. The sound of the kettle hissing, the creak of floorboards when no one else was home, the whisper of wind brushing against the window like a memory that hadn't decided whether to knock or move on. The days had a rhythm now, not perfect, not busy, but honest. And when I woke that morning, there was no earthquake in my chest, no weight sitting on me before I opened my eyes, just the slow stretch of limbs under warm covers, the soft breath of a woman who was no longer waiting. I got up before the sun, lit the new candle before the kettle, poured a glass of water before I made tea. My movements were intentional, steady. I was building a life in the smallest of ways. It had been 3 days since Claire's last message. 3 days of silence, but not the kind that haunted me anymore. 3 days of choosing myself, again and again. And that morning, I chose peace. I chose routine. I chose not to check my phone first. I chose to feed the birds in the backyard, even though the ground was stiff with frost. I scattered seeds anyway, watched as sparrows danced their hungry thanks from the fence line. Sometimes you give without being seen. Sometimes the giving is the point. I sat with my tea, hands wrapped around the mug, and thought about all the pieces of me that had broken off over the years. The versions of myself I'd shed like old skin. The young mother desperate to do everything right. The tired woman who poured herself into the shape of everyone else's expectations. The quiet wife who let grief hollow her out after James died, and still managed to smile for her daughter. The mother who waited by the phone, who begged for acknowledgement in the language of favors and last-minute help, who lit birthday candles alone, who set extra places at tables only to pack up the leftovers and pretend it was enough. I mourned her, but I no longer missed her. That woman had served a purpose. She had kept the lights on. She had raised a daughter. She had held grief by the neck and dared it to take her whole. But she was gone now, and in her place stood someone new, someone who didn't flinch at silence, who knew that peace doesn't come wrapped in apologies, but in the decision to stop needing them, who had lit candles not for others, but for herself. Later that afternoon, I found myself back in the attic. I hadn't been up there in months, not since summer, not since I boxed up the last of Claire's childhood things and tucked them into the corner behind the broken rocking chair. The air was stale, but the light from the single window cut through it like a blade. I opened the boxes slowly. Each item still carried weight, her old ballet shoes, a crayon drawing of our house with crooked windows and a heart over the roof, a photo of the two of us at her kindergarten graduation, her in a paper cap, me in a navy dress I no longer owned. I held that photo in my hands a long time. We looked happy, not perfect, not posed, but happy. There was a time she loved me out loud, unashamed, unafraid. A time when her arms wrapped around my neck with fierce certainty, and her love wasn't buried beneath years of guilt and silence and forgotten phone calls. I didn't cry. I just breathed. In. Outside. I slid the photo into my pocket, closed the box, and left the rest untouched. Some things were better kept where they belonged, in the past, behind you, but not denied. That evening, I baked cornbread. Not for anyone in particular. Not because it was a holiday. Just because the house needed the smell of something warm. I moved through the kitchen like a woman who had nothing to prove, just memories to honor, and a body still capable of giving comfort. When the phone rang, I didn't run to it. I let it ring twice before I answered. It was Claire. Her voice cracked on the first word. Hi. I didn't speak. I wasn't sure if you'd answer, she said. I leaned against the counter, the scent of cornbread curling through the air like a hand on my shoulder. I wasn't sure I would either. She exhaled, shaky. I don't deserve it. I know that. I stayed silent. Let her sit in that truth a moment longer. I've been thinking about everything, she continued. The letter, the silence, the way I just disappeared. I wish I could explain it, but there's no excuse that would make it better. I took a breath. I don't need excuses, Claire. She sniffed. Then what do you need? I needed time, I said. I needed space. I needed you to see that I wasn't going to keep giving just because you remembered how to ask. Silence again. Then softly, I see it now. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. That's a start. I don't expect things to go back to how they were, she said. I don't even know if I deserve a place in your life anymore. My voice was calm, steady. You don't get to decide that. I know. We sat in the quiet, and then she asked, so quietly I almost missed it. Can I come by sometime? Just to talk. No expectations. I thought about the daffodil bulb sleeping beneath the frost. I thought about the candle flickering beside me. I thought about the photo in my pocket. I'm not ready today, I said. Maybe not tomorrow, but maybe someday. She didn't argue. She didn't beg. She just whispered, okay. I'll wait. And then she hung up. I stood there for a long time, not broken, not angry, just breathing. The timer dinged. The cornbread was ready. I took it out, set it on the counter to cool, and walked into the living room. Lit the candle again. Watched the flame steady itself. Bright, tall, unapologetic. I picked up my notebook, flipped to the back, and wrote one last line. Forgiveness is not an invitation, it's a release. Then I closed the book and let the light stay on. The house is quiet now. Not the aching kind of quiet that used to press in from the walls. Not the silence of unanswered calls or empty chairs at the table. This quiet feels earned, like a room that's finally been aired out after years of holding its breath. There's peace here. Not because everything's been fixed, not because the past has been rewritten, but because I stopped waiting for someone else to come rewrite it for me. The photo of Claire still sits on the end of the mantel. I don't avoid it anymore. I pass by it, dust it, even pause to look at it sometimes. The girl in that picture is still mine. And maybe the woman she became is trying to find her way back. Or maybe not. Either way, I've stopped building my worth around the hope of being chosen. I light the candle every evening now, not as a ritual of grief, but as a declaration, a soft reminder that I've made it through, that I'm still here, that there's life on the other side of disappointment. Sometimes Emmy calls just to say goodnight. Sometimes Jackson drops off leftovers because he made too much. Sometimes the birds in the yard come earlier than expected and eat before I even finish scattering the seed. And sometimes I laugh. Not the brittle laugh of someone pretending, but real, from the belly. The kind of laugh that says, I survived this. All of it. The pain didn't destroy me. The silence didn't erase me. The absence didn't define me. I am still standing, still whole, still here, still mine. And that is enough. That is everything. That is survival. This story may have ended, but the message lingers. For more raw and real moments like this, click on the left and subscribe to walk alongside more women finding their strength. Healing takes time, but it's possible.